Every summer for more than 170 years, the British royal family has retreated to a castle in the Scottish Highlands. 53,000 acres of wilderness, granite walls 3 feet thick, a private estate so shielded from public scrutiny that its financial records answer to no government body on earth. To the outside world, Balmoral is a charming holiday home. But behind the tartan curtains and the locked doors, this castle has operated as something far more deliberate, a machine for testing loyalty, enforcing silence, and breaking anyone who refused to conform. Princess Diana called it the place that sucked her dry. She was not the first. She would not be the last. Chapter 1. The castle that was never meant to be found. In 1451, a name appeared in Scottish records for a place so remote that most of Britain would not learn it existed for another 400 years. The name was Balmoral. It surfaced in a rental roll during the reign of King James II of Scotland, scratched into a document alongside a list of tenants and livestock counts. There was no castle yet, no clock tower, no granite facade catching the autumn light, just a patch of land in the valley of the River Dee, surrounded by birch forest and empty hills, where the wind came down from the cairngorms with nothing to stop it for 30 miles. This is where the story begins, not in a palace, not in a throne room, in a valley so far from power that power itself would need 4 centuries to find it. The land passed through hands the way remote Scottish estates always did. Robert II granted it to Sir William Drummond. It drifted to the Gordons, then to the Farquharsons, Jacobite loyalists who backed the wrong side of history and lost nearly everything for it. By the early 1800s, Balmoral was a modest tower house on a hillside, leased to a retired diplomat named Sir Robert Gordon. He planted trees, he fished, he did nothing of particular consequence. The estate existed in a kind of comfortable irrelevance, known only to the people who lived on it and the deer that grazed its hills. Then, in the autumn of 1847, Sir Robert Gordon died. His lease passed to his brother, the Earl of Aberdeen, and word of the vacancy reached the one person who would change everything. Queen Victoria had been searching. She and Prince Albert had tried the Isle of Wight. They had endured the damp misery of the English south coast. Albert, born in the forests of Thuringia, craved something that reminded him of home: mountains, clean air, silence. Their physician, Sir James Clark, had recommended Deeside for its dry climate. The royal couple's first visit came on a September afternoon in 1848. Victoria stepped out of her carriage, looked at the hills turning copper in the fading light, and wrote in her diary that evening words that would seal Balmoral's fate. She called it perfect. She said the air was pure. She wrote that all seemed to breathe freedom and peace, and that it made her feel as though she had left the world far behind. Albert saw in the rolling highland landscape the ghost of his German childhood. The pine forests, the granite outcrops, the way the clouds sat low on the mountains in the early morning. He did not simply like Balmoral, he recognized it. What made 2 of the most powerful people in Europe fall in love with one of the most inaccessible places in Britain? The answer is the inaccessibility itself. Victoria was queen of the largest empire the world had ever known. Every room she entered was a performance. Every meal was a ceremony. Every conversation was recorded, reported, and scrutinized. Balmoral offered her the thing no palace in London or Windsor could provide: distance. 500 miles from Parliament, 500 miles from the press, 500 miles from the machinery of obligation that governed every waking hour of her life. For Albert, the attraction ran deeper still. He was a man who craved control. In London, he was the Queen's consort, a title that granted influence but not authority. At Balmoral, surrounded by wilderness that answered to no one, he saw something else entirely. He saw raw material, a landscape he could shape, a world he could build from the ground up, stone by stone, room by room, ritual by ritual. Within 4 years, he would do exactly that, and the building he created would still be standing 170 years later, long after the man, the woman, and the empire that built it had all turned to dust. But first, the old castle had to die. Chapter 2. Albert's Obsession Built in Stone. Prince Albert did not simply buy Balmoral. He dismantled it and rebuilt it in his own image. The purchase came in 1852. The price was £32,000, roughly $4 million in today's money, paid from the private purse of a prince who technically had no independent income. Albert negotiated the deal himself. He studied the maps, he walked the boundaries, he counted the timber and assessed the salmon runs. This was not a man buying a holiday cottage. This was a man acquiring a kingdom. The old castle, the modest tower house that Sir Robert Gordon had once called home, was doomed from the moment Albert first measured its walls. It was too small, too dark, too much a product of someone else's imagination. Albert wanted something that announced itself, something that could hold a court, host a foreign emperor, and still feel like a home. Something that looked as though it had grown from the hillside itself. He found his architect in William Smith of Aberdeen. Or rather, he found a man willing to execute his vision, because Albert was the true architect of Balmoral. He sketched floor plans, he specified ceiling heights. He chose the granite, insisting it be quarried from Glen Gelder on the estate itself, so that the castle would literally be made from its own land. The stone was pale gray, flecked with mica that caught the light. When the walls went up, they glittered. There was controversy from the start. William Byrne, a more prominent architect, claimed that Smith's designs borrowed heavily from his own earlier proposals. The accusation of plagiarism lingered in professional circles for years. Albert paid it no attention. He was too busy choosing wallpaper. The foundation stone was laid on the 28th of September, 1853. Albert placed beneath it a sealed bottle containing coins of the realm and a parchment bearing the date. It was a ritual as old as building itself. A message to the future from a man who believed he was constructing something permanent. And he was. The castle that rose over the next 3 years was a monument to one man's obsession with order. The numbers tell the story. The main tower climbed 80 feet into the highland sky, visible from miles away, a declaration of ownership punched into the landscape. The walls were 3 feet thick, built to hold back Scottish winters that could last from October to April. The estate sprawled across 53,000 acres, an area larger than the city of Edinburgh. Within its boundaries stood more than 150 buildings, lodges, cottages, stables, workshops, farmhouses, and the great castle itself, arranged with the precision of a military encampment. Inside, Albert's control reached into every corner. He designed the tartan carpets. He specified the wallpaper pattern, a Royal Stuart tartan that covered virtually every surface until visitors complained of tartan blindness. He positioned the furniture. He selected the antlers that hung above the doorways. One guest noted that the decor was so relentlessly Scottish that it felt less like Scotland and more like a German prince's fantasy of what Scotland should look like, which of course is exactly what it was. The northeastern block was reserved for servants. It was connected to the main house, but invisible from the principal rooms, a layout that allowed an army of staff to move through the building without ever being seen by the family they served. This was not an accident, it was a design philosophy. The machinery of comfort was meant to be felt, never witnessed. Fires appeared in grates without anyone seeing them lit. Meals arrived at precise times without the clatter of kitchens reaching the dining room. The castle operated like a clockwork mechanism, and Albert had wound every spring. The old castle was demolished in 1856, the same year the new one was completed. Albert did not repurpose it. He did not convert it into servants' quarters or a storage building. He erased it. Every stone was removed. The site was cleared and grassed over as though the original Balmoral had never existed. A man literally destroying the past to impose his future. Victoria adored it. She called the new castle her dear paradise. Albert called it his greatest achievement. For 5 years, they lived inside his creation, walking the grounds he had landscaped, eating in the rooms he had designed, sleeping beneath the ceilings he had specified. Then, in December of 1861, Albert died. He was 42 years old, and the machine he had built, the castle designed to answer to one man's vision, was suddenly in the hands of a grief-stricken woman who would spend the next 40 years turning it into something Albert never imagined. A shrine. Chapter 3. The machine switches on. The tartan wallpaper was barely dry before Balmoral began doing what it was truly built to do. In its earliest years, the castle operated exactly as Albert had intended. It was a stage. A controlled environment where the royal family could perform a carefully curated version of domestic life, while simultaneously projecting imperial power to anyone important enough to receive an invitation. The guest list from the 1850s and 60s read like a catalog of European influence. Diplomats, generals, prime ministers, foreign secretaries, each one arriving by carriage after the long journey north. Each one stepping into a world where every detail had been arranged to impress and to test. The daily schedule was the engine of this machine. Breakfast at 9, a morning walk or ride, lunch at 2, an afternoon excursion, often a picnic in the hills, weather permitting. Tea at 5, dinner at 8:30, formal dress required, no exceptions. After dinner, entertainment in the ballroom, which despite its name was an intimate space, wood-paneled and warm, where the Queen might ask a guest to sing or to dance a reel. The evenings ended when Victoria retired. No one left before the Queen. This rhythm was not hospitality, it was surveillance. Every meal was an opportunity to observe. Every walk was a chance to assess. Every evening in the ballroom was an audition. Did the guests know when to speak and when to stay silent? Could they handle a shotgun without embarrassment? Did they dress correctly for dinner? Did they complain about the cold? The answers to these questions determined something far more important than social standing. They determined whether you could be trusted. This was the Balmoral test. It was never written down. No one announced its existence. But everyone who entered the castle understood instinctively that they were being evaluated. The test measured one quality above all others: the willingness to conform. Those who submitted to the rituals, who wore the right clothes, who walked the hills without complaint, who laughed at the right moments and stayed silent at the right moments, were rewarded with further invitations. Those who resisted, who questioned the schedule, who failed to hide their discomfort, were quietly dropped from the guest list and never invited back. The social peak came in September of 1896, when Emperor Nicholas II of Russia and his wife Alexandra visited Balmoral with their infant daughter, Olga. The visit was a diplomatic event of the highest order. Two empires meeting on a Scottish hillside, surrounded by grouse moors and deer forests, pretending to be on holiday while their advisors negotiated the future of Central Asia. The photographs from that week show the two royal families arranged on the castle steps, stiff and formal, the mountains rising behind them like a painted backdrop. Within 22 years, Nicholas, Alexandra, and all their children would be dead, murdered in a basement in Yekaterinburg. But at Balmoral in 1896, the machinery was humming. The castle was performing its function flawlessly. Victoria, for her part, was constructing something even more ambitious than a diplomatic stage. She was building an identity. Her love of the Highlands, her passion for tartan, her romanticized vision of Scottish rural life, all of it radiated outward from Balmoral and reshaped the way the world understood Scotland itself. Like, she attended the Braemar Highland Games. She commissioned Edwin Landseer to paint the stags and the mountains. She wore tartan shawls and surrounded herself with Highland servants who spoke Gaelic and called her by name. The effect was extraordinary. Before Victoria, the Highlands were widely regarded as a remote and somewhat barbaric corner of Britain, home to cattle raiders and failed rebels. After Victoria, they became the romantic heart of the nation. Tartan became fashionable across Europe. Highland estates became the ultimate status symbol. The very idea of Scotland as a land of misty mountains and noble savagery, an image that persists to this day, was manufactured in large part within the walls of Balmoral Castle. Historians would later call this phenomenon Balmoralization, the transformation of a living culture into a decorative fantasy, packaged for export by a German prince and an English queen who found in Scotland's wilderness exactly what they needed: a mirror that reflected their own dreams back at them. By the late 1850s, the machine was complete. The schedule ran like clockwork. The guest lists were carefully curated. The servants moved unseen through the hidden corridors. The tartan gleamed on every surface. The hills outside were stocked with deer. The empire's most powerful figures came and went, tested and sorted, approved or discarded. Balmoral was functioning exactly as designed, a machine of control humming with perfect, invisible efficiency. It would take a death to reveal what the machine was truly capable of hiding. Chapter 4. The Queen, the Servant, and the Locked Room. On the 14th of December, 1861, Prince Albert died, and Balmoral's first great secret was born. He was 42. The cause was almost certainly typhoid fever, though some modern historians have suggested stomach cancer. Victoria was at his bedside at Windsor Castle. She screamed, she collapsed. She would later write that her life, as she had known it, ended in that room. What followed was not simply grief. It was a geological event. Victoria's mourning reshaped the landscape of Balmoral as surely as any glacier. She ordered cairns built on the hillsides, stone monuments marking every place she and Albert had walked together. She commissioned statues. She preserved his rooms exactly as he had left them. His clothes were laid out each evening. Hot water was brought to his dressing room every morning. The castle became a museum of a marriage, every corridor a memorial, every object a relic. But it was not the monuments that would create the scandal. It was a man. John Brown was a ghillie, a Highland servant. He had first come to royal attention when he led Victoria's pony during walks on the estate. He was tall, broad-shouldered, direct in speech, and utterly without the obsequious manner that characterized most royal servants. He called the Queen woman. He told her when she was being foolish. He carried her when the path was rough. In a court built on deference, Brown was the only person who treated Victoria as a human being, rather than an institution. After Albert's death, Brown's role expanded with astonishing speed. He was appointed the Queen's Highland servant, then her personal attendant. He accompanied her everywhere. He stood outside her door. He carried messages to her ministers. He occupied rooms adjacent to hers. Within a few years, he had become the most powerful servant in Britain and the most whispered about. The rumors were ferocious. A Swiss newspaper published an allegation that Victoria had secretly married Brown and was carrying his child. The story was almost certainly false, but it spread across Europe like a brush fire. The British press was more cautious, held in check by libel laws and lingering deference, but the nickname was everywhere. Mrs. Brown, spoken in drawing rooms and gentlemen's clubs, printed in satirical pamphlets. The suggestion was unmistakable. Lord Derby, one of the most senior politicians of the era, kept a diary. In it, he catalogued the behaviors that alarmed the court. Victoria rode alone with Brown for hours across the estate. Brown was present in her private rooms at times when no servant should have been. Messages to persons of the highest rank were sent not through her secretary, but through Brown himself. Senior courtiers complained, family members protested. Victoria ignored them all. Was there a sexual relationship? The honest answer is that no one knows. The evidence is suggestive, but not conclusive. What is conclusive is that Victoria loved John Brown with an intensity that she did not trouble to hide from anyone except the public. She gave him gifts. She wrote about him with a warmth she reserved for no one else after Albert. She kept his photograph beside her bed. And then there was the deathbed confession. The Reverend Norman Macleod, a Church of Scotland minister and one of Victoria's closest confidants, reportedly confessed on his deathbed that he had officiated at a secret marriage between the Queen and John Brown. Under Scottish irregular marriage law, such a ceremony would have been legally valid. No witnesses were required beyond the minister. No registration was necessary. 2 people, a spoken vow, and a man of God. That was enough. Macleod's confession was reported secondhand and has never been verified. The Church of Scotland kept no record of it. Victoria's own journals, which might have settled the question, were systematically edited after her death, their most revealing passages destroyed. But consider what Balmoral made possible: 53,000 acres of wilderness, a castle 3 feet thick, a staff trained from birth to see nothing and say less, a location 500 miles from London, from Parliament, from the press. If you wanted to hide the most scandalous relationship in Victorian Britain, you could not have designed a better hiding place than the one Albert had already built. The castle did not judge Victoria. It did not question her choices. It simply closed its doors, drew its curtains, and kept the secret safe. This was Balmoral performing its concealment function for the first time at full capacity. The machine had found its true purpose. And when Victoria finally died, in January of 1901, the secret she carried was so dangerous that it took 2 people working behind a locked door, following instructions written in the Queen's own hand, to ensure that the truth would be buried with her body. Chapter 5. What Victoria took to her grave. 3 days after Queen Victoria died, her doctor and her dresser locked the door and began following instructions no one else was ever meant to read. Victoria had prepared 2 sets of funeral directions. The first was public. 12 pages of meticulous detail governing the ceremonial aspects of her death. The route of the procession, the order of precedence, the hymns to be sung, the placement of the coffin. This document was shared with her household and her government. It was a script for the final performance of an empress. The second list was private. It was given only to her physician, Sir James Reed, and her dresser, a woman who had served her for decades. Their instructions were precise and unyielding. They were to arrange the coffin before anyone else entered the room. They were to place certain objects inside it, and they were to conceal certain other objects so thoroughly that no member of the royal family would ever know they were there. The visible items were unsurprising. Albert's dressing gown, folded and placed at her side. A plaster cast of his hand, cold white marble clutching nothing. Photographs of her children and grandchildren. These were the tokens of a grieving widow, appropriate and expected. Then came the hidden items. On Victoria's left hand, Reed placed a ring. It was not Albert's ring. It was the wedding ring of John Brown's mother. Victoria had kept it for decades. Now, in death, she wore it. In her left hand, Reed placed a photograph of John Brown. Beside it, a lock of his hair. Then, following Victoria's explicit instructions, he covered both items with flowers. The arrangement was deliberate. Anyone looking into the coffin would see a queen surrounded by blossoms, a picture of dignity and peace. They would not see what lay beneath. Victoria had engineered her own final concealment. Even in death, she used the tools Balmoral had taught her: secrecy, arrangement, control. The truth was there. It was simply invisible. But the new king had his own plans. Edward VII had despised John Brown for decades. The servant's intimacy with his mother had humiliated him publicly and excluded him privately. Within weeks of Victoria's death, Edward launched a systematic campaign to erase Brown from royal history. It was thorough, it was ruthless, and it was almost entirely successful. The statues came down first. Victoria had commissioned several busts and memorials to Brown on the Balmoral estate. Edward ordered them removed. Some were smashed. Others were hidden in storage rooms where they gathered dust for decades. The rooms Brown had occupied were converted to other uses. His name was stripped from household records wherever possible. A full-length bronze statue by the sculptor Joseph Edgar Boehm, inscribed with the words, "Friend more than servant," was too large to destroy without attracting attention. Edward had it moved instead. He banished it to a remote corner of the estate, hidden behind hedges, facing a wall. It stands there still, but the most devastating act of erasure was not Edward's. It was his sister's. Princess Beatrice, Victoria's youngest daughter, had been appointed literary executor of her mother's journals. The diaries were vast. Victoria had written almost every day of her adult life, filling volume after volume with observations, opinions, gossip, and intimate reflections. They constituted one of the most detailed records of the 19th century, written by the most powerful woman in the world. Beatrice's task was to transcribe the journals into fresh volumes. She worked for 30 years. She copied selected passages in her own neat handwriting. And then she burned the originals. Not all of them. But historians estimate that Beatrice destroyed roughly 2/3 of her mother's words. The passages that survived were those Beatrice deemed appropriate for posterity. The passages that burned were those she did not. Since Beatrice alone decided what was appropriate, and since the originals no longer exist for comparison, there is no way to know what was lost. The most intimate written record of the Victorian era was curated by a daughter who worshipped her mother and feared the truth in equal measure. What remains are the transcriptions. They sit today in the Royal Archives at Windsor, written in Beatrice's handwriting, roughly 1/3 of the original text. Scholars who study them note the gaps, conversations that begin and end abruptly, references to people and events that appear once and never again, long stretches of silence where Victoria's pen clearly moved, but Beatrice's did not follow. Balmoral had kept Victoria's secret while she lived. Her coffin kept it in death. But the diaries were the most dangerous evidence of all, the one thing that could have spoken when the Queen could not. Beatrice silenced them as surely as the castle had silenced everything else. The question this chapter forces us to confront is uncomfortable. What happens when the person Balmoral was built to protect decides the secrets must survive even beyond death, and the person who inherits the castle decides they must be destroyed? The answer, it turns out, is a kind of stalemate. Victoria's ring, her photograph, her lock of hair, all survived beneath the flowers. Beatrice's bonfires consumed the words, but not the objects. Edward's fury toppled the statues, but could not reach the body in the coffin. The truth was not destroyed. It was merely scattered. A ring on a dead hand, a statue behind a hedge, a gap in a transcribed diary where something used to be. And the castle stood through all of it, unchanged, indifferent, waiting for its next secret. It would not have to wait long. Chapter 6. The honeymoon that drew blood. Diana Spencer arrived at Balmoral as a bride in the summer of 1981 and left 3 months later with razor marks on her wrists. She had passed the test. That was the bitter irony. In the autumn of 1980, Diana had been invited to Balmoral for a weekend as a prospective match for the Prince of Wales. She was 19 years old. She came from an aristocratic family that understood the rules. She wore the right clothes. She walked the hills without complaint. She was charming and shy, and exactly what the machine was designed to identify: a woman who appeared willing to conform. The royal family approved. The engagement was announced in February of 1981. The wedding followed in July, watched by 750 million people worldwide. The fairy tale was complete. Then came the honeymoon. Charles and Diana spent the first days aboard the royal yacht Britannia, sailing the Scottish coast. The rows began almost immediately. Diana would later describe blazing arguments. She was confused and frightened. She had discovered the cufflinks, a pair of gold links engraved with 2 intertwined C's. She believed they were a gift from Camilla Parker Bowles. Charles denied it, or explained it. The accounts differ. What does not differ is the emotional devastation Diana described. She was 20 years old on her honeymoon, and she already understood that she was not the only woman in her marriage. From Britannia, they went to Balmoral. 3 months, an entire autumn. And it was here, inside the granite walls Albert had designed and Victoria had sanctified, that Diana began to break. The schedule consumed her. Breakfast at 9, lunch at 1, tea at 5, dinner at 8:15. Each meal required a different outfit. The changes were not suggestions. They were expectations enforced by a century of precedent and the silent disapproval of a household that had been performing this routine since before Diana's grandmother was born. 50 full-time staff maintained the invisible infrastructure of the castle, the fires, the silver, the pressed linens, the freshly cut flowers in every room. None of this was for Diana's comfort. It was the machine running as it always ran, indifferent to who was inside it. The weather closed in. October on D-side is not charming. The rain is horizontal. The mist sits in the valley for days. The light fades by 4 in the afternoon and does not return until 8 the next morning. Diana, already struggling with the early stages of what would later be identified as bulimia, found herself trapped. The walks were in the rain. The conversations were about shooting. The evenings were formal. And everywhere she looked, the castle reflected back not her life, but a life that had been lived long before she arrived and would continue long after she left. There was the blooding, a tradition in which a person's first deer kill is marked by the smearing of blood across their face. Diana found it revolting. She said so. The family found her reaction baffling. They had been doing this for 100 years. The deer were part of Balmoral's ecosystem, a herd of 2,000 to 2,500 red deer managed across the estate as carefully as any crop. The annual cull was not sport to them. It was stewardship. But to Diana, it was barbarism dressed in tweed. She began to lose weight. She began to harm herself. She threw herself down a staircase. She cut her wrists. These were not suicide attempts. They were, as she would later explain, cries for help from a woman who felt utterly invisible inside a castle designed to make individuals disappear. Her own words, spoken years later, remain the most devastating indictment of Balmoral ever uttered by a member of the royal family. That house sucks one dry. 6 words. No metaphor is needed. The building, in Diana's experience, was not a home. It was a parasite. Set this against what Charles said about the same place. He told friends that he felt empty and incomplete without Balmoral, that the estate restored him, that the mountains and the silence and the ritual were the only things that made him feel whole. The same walls, the same schedule, the same 53,000 acres, experienced as salvation by one person and as suffocation by another. This is the truth the Balmoral test was never designed to reveal. It could identify who would conform. It could not predict what conformity would cost. Diana conformed. She wore the tartan. She walked the hills. She sat through the dinners and changed her clothes 4 times a day and smiled at the staff and held her tongue when the men talked about stalking. She passed every visible test the castle could administer, and it broke her anyway. By the end of October, Diana returned to London early. The official explanation was that she missed the city. The real explanation was that 3 months inside Balmoral's machine had reduced a 20-year-old woman to desperation. She left. The castle did not notice. The schedule continued. The fires were lit. The silver was polished. The deer grazed the hills. Balmoral had done what it had always done. It had ground forward, unchanged and indifferent, caring nothing for the person caught in its gears. 16 years later, that indifference would nearly destroy the institution it was built to protect. Chapter 7. 5 days behind granite walls. On the morning of the 31st of August, 1997, the Queen ordered every newspaper removed from Balmoral Castle and every television switched off. The call had come at 4:30. Robert Fellows, the Queen's private secretary and Diana's brother-in-law, telephoned the Prince of Wales at Balmoral to inform him that Diana had been involved in a car accident in Paris. The early reports suggested serious injuries. By the time the full picture emerged, Diana, Princess of Wales, was dead. She was 36 years old. Charles woke the Queen. He woke the Queen Mother. He did not wake his sons. William was 15. Harry was 12. They were asleep in their beds at the castle, and their father made the decision to let them sleep through the night and tell them in the morning. It was by any measure an act of mercy. It was also the first in a series of decisions that would be governed not by the reality of what had happened in Paris, but by the reality of where the family happened to be. They were at Balmoral. And Balmoral had only one response to a crisis: close the doors. The Queen's instinct was immediate and unwavering. This was a private family matter. The boys had lost their mother. They needed peace, silence, and the comfort of routine. The newspapers, with their screaming headlines and their photographs, would only cause more pain. So she removed them. The televisions were switched off. The castle sealed itself shut. For 5 days, the royal family existed inside a bubble of Highland granite, cut off from the outside world by design and by choice. This was not cruelty. This was not tone deafness, though it would later be called both. This was the castle doing what it had always done. For 140 years, Balmoral had functioned as a refuge from public scrutiny. It had hidden Victoria's grief. It had hidden her relationship with Brown. It had hidden Diana's suffering behind locked doors and rigid schedules. Now it was hiding the royal family from the biggest media event since the Second World War, and it was doing so with the same invisible efficiency it had always employed. The walls were 3 feet thick. The estate was 53,000 acres. The nearest city was 100 miles away. The machine was working perfectly. Outside those walls, Britain was burning. The flowers began arriving at Kensington Palace within hours. By Monday, they were knee-deep. By Wednesday, they stretched for hundreds of yards, a sea of cellophane and handwritten cards and teddy bears, accumulating against the gates with a force that felt less like mourning and more like fury. Because the nation was furious. Not at the paparazzi who had chased Diana's car, not at the driver who had been drinking. They were furious at the silence from Scotland. 500 miles separated Balmoral from Buckingham Palace. 5 days of silence. One empty flagpole, millions of mourners, and a single headline that cut through everything: "Where is our Queen?" The flagpole was the symbol that crystallized the rage. Above Buckingham Palace, the royal standard flies when the sovereign is in residence. When the sovereign is absent, no flag flies at all. The Queen was at Balmoral. Therefore, the flagpole was bare. This was protocol. This was tradition. This was how it had always been done. But to the millions of grieving people gathered below, that bare pole was an insult. It said, "We do not care." It said, "She does not matter." It said, "The rules of this institution are more important than the death of your princess." The pressure built like water behind a dam. The tabloids, the broadsheets, the television commentators, the people in the streets, all of them demanding the same thing. Come back, speak, show us you feel something. Inside Balmoral, the family was doing what the castle had trained generations of royals to do. They were carrying on. William and Harry went to church that Sunday morning. They walked with their grandmother. They rode ponies. The routine held. The walls held. The machine held. But the world had changed, and the machine had not. Chapter 8. The Flag That Broke the Spell. For the first time in its history, the machinery of Balmoral worked exactly as intended and produced a catastrophe. The family was not pretending, that they were not staging indifference. By every credible account, the Queen and her household were genuinely unaware of the scale of public anger building against them. This was not a failure of character. It was a consequence of architecture. Balmoral had been engineered to remove its occupants from the outside world. No newspapers, no television, no internet, which in 1997 was still a novelty for most people and entirely absent from the castle. The family's only source of information was their own staff, who were trained above all else to shield the sovereign from disturbance. The irony was perfect and devastating. Victoria's castle, built to protect the monarchy from scrutiny, was now protecting the monarchy from the information it desperately needed to survive. The first crack appeared on Wednesday, 4 days after Diana's death. Someone, and accounts vary on who, persuaded the Queen to venture outside the castle gates to view the flowers that local people had laid at the entrance to the estate. The photographs from that excursion are among the most studied images of the crisis. The Queen in her headscarf, Philip beside her, William and Harry, small and pale, bending to read the cards. It was awkward, it was stilted, it was too little, but it was a beginning. The family had stepped outside the walls, and the walls could not pull them back. The return to London came on Friday, the 5th of September. The Queen, the Duke of Edinburgh, and the princes flew south. They drove through the crowds gathered outside Buckingham Palace. They stopped the car. They got out. They looked at the flowers. For the first time in 5 days, the sovereign was visible. That evening, the Queen made a live television broadcast. It was only her second such address outside of her annual Christmas message, in a reign spanning nearly 5 decades. She sat in a room at Buckingham Palace with the crowds visible through the window behind her, a staging choice that was itself a concession to the new reality. She spoke of Diana as an exceptional human being. She spoke as a queen and as a grandmother. The words were carefully chosen, warm enough to acknowledge the grief, formal enough to maintain the dignity the Queen believed the moment required. And above Buckingham Palace, for the first time in history, the Union Jack flew at half-mast. This was an astonishing concession. That the royal standard never flies at half-mast because the sovereign never dies. The crown passes instantly from one monarch to the next. But the bare flagpole had become a symbol of royal indifference. And symbols, in a media age, have consequences that protocol cannot contain. The decision to fly a different flag at half-mast, to bend a rule that had never been bent, was the monarchy's admission that the old system had failed. Balmoral's design flaw was now visible to the entire world. The castle had been built to hide. For 140 years, hiding had worked. Victoria hid her grief and her love affair. The family hid Diana's misery. The institution hid its internal workings behind 53,000 acres of highland wilderness and a schedule that had not changed since the 1850s. But the world of 1997 was not the world of 1857. Satellite television, 24-hour news, camera crews at every gate, a public that no longer accepted that royal grief was a private matter. In this world, silence was not dignity. Silence was guilt. And 53,000 acres of wilderness was no longer enough to hide behind. The monarchy survived the crisis. But something fundamental had shifted. The contract between the crown and the people had been rewritten in the space of 5 days. and the new terms were clear. You may grieve privately, but you must be seen to grieve. You may retreat to your castle, but you must come back. The walls of Balmoral could still provide shelter, but they could no longer provide invisibility. The machine still worked, but the world it was designed for no longer existed, and the people it had tested, sorted, and broken were about to start talking. Chapter 9. The specimens who refused to be inspected. After 1997, the people who failed the Balmoral test began telling the world exactly what it felt like. Paul Burrell was first. Diana's former butler, a man who had served the royal household for years, published his account of life behind the castle walls. His description of the Balmoral system was clinical and damning. He said the estate was used to inspect potential brides. His exact comparison was unforgettable. The women were examined, he said, like specimens, brought to the castle, observed over a weekend, assessed against criteria that were never stated and could never be challenged. Did she shoot? Could she walk 12 miles in the rain without complaining? Did she defer to the Queen? Did she understand the hierarchy of who enters a room first? Who sits where? Who speaks when? The test had no passing score because conformity, by its nature, is never quite enough. You could do everything right and still be found wanting. You could submit completely and still feel the cold assessment behind the smiles. The system was designed not to welcome, but to filter, and the filter's mesh was so fine that almost no one could pass through it entirely intact. Margaret Thatcher's experience became legendary. The Prime Minister, the most powerful woman in Britain, arrived at Balmoral for the customary autumn weekend in the early 1980s. She came without country shoes. This was noticed. She came without the appropriate outdoor clothing. This was noticed. She sat on the furniture with apparent discomfort, unfamiliar with the unwritten rules of a house where every chair belonged to someone, and sitting in the wrong one was a social catastrophe. She later described her annual visits to Balmoral as purgatory. The word was not chosen lightly. Purgatory is a place of punishment that one must endure to reach a better destination. Thatcher endured it because the Constitution required it. She did not pretend to enjoy it. Cherie Blair, the wife of Prime Minister Tony Blair, reportedly refused to curtsy to the Queen during visits to Balmoral. The refusal was small, a gesture, a moment that lasted no more than a second. But in a household where deference was the oxygen supply, even a momentary withdrawal was noted, recorded, and remembered. Then came Meghan Markle. Her entry into the royal family in 2018 brought the Balmoral test into the 21st century and exposed its mechanics to an audience of millions. Markle, an American actress raised in Los Angeles, arrived at Balmoral with a set of cultural assumptions that the castle was not designed to accommodate. The hunting culture unsettled her. The formality exhausted her. The unspoken rules that generations of British aristocrats had absorbed from childhood, were invisible to her and therefore impossible to follow. In her interview with Oprah Winfrey, Markle did not describe Balmoral specifically, but her account of royal life echoed every previous testimony. The isolation, the silence, the feeling of being watched and assessed without knowing the criteria, the discovery that the institution's warmth was conditional on submission, and that submission was expected to be total. What emerged from these accounts, taken together, was a pattern so consistent that coincidence could not explain it. The Balmoral test was not a charming eccentricity. It was not an amusing ritual of a traditional family. It was an institutional mechanism for enforcing conformity and excluding those who did not meet standards that were never clearly defined. This was the architecture of control functioning exactly as designed. The castle did not need to threaten anyone. It did not need to raise its voice. It simply established a set of expectations so rigid, so deeply embedded in every aspect of the daily routine, that deviation was impossible without detection, and conformity was impossible without cost. And the genius of the system was that it appeared to be hospitality. The guest was invited. The guest was housed in beautiful rooms. The guest was fed excellent food and taken on scenic walks and seated beside interesting people at dinner. Nothing about the experience appeared punitive, and yet person after person, decade after decade, emerged from behind those walls with the same description. They felt tested. They felt watched. They felt that the castle was not welcoming them, but evaluating them, and that the evaluation was based on rules they were never allowed to see. Diana said the house sucked her dry. Thatcher called it purgatory. Burrell called it an inspection. Markle described a world that left her isolated and voiceless. Each testimony arrived independently. Each described the same machine. The question that hung over Balmoral at the start of the 21st century was simple and existential. If the people the castle was built to contain were now speaking openly about what happened inside, could the castle's oldest function survive? Could Balmoral still operate as a sealed vault when the vault's former prisoners were giving interviews on global television? The answer came from an unexpected source, not from the people who had been broken by the castle, from the man who had inherited it. Chapter 10. 110 pounds to see behind the curtain. In 2024, for the first time in 168 years, strangers walked through Balmoral's private rooms, and the walls did not stop them. Charles III made the decision. The king, who had once said he felt empty without Balmoral, and chose to do the one thing the castle had been designed to prevent. He opened the doors. The tours began in the summer. Groups of 12, 110 pounds per person, guided through the rooms that had been sealed to outsiders since Albert's day. The ballroom where Victoria danced, the drawing room with its restored hunting Stuart tartan carpets, the corridors where servants had moved unseen for a century and a half. Every tour sold out within hours of being listed. The demand was extraordinary. People wanted to see. After 168 years of being told that Balmoral was private, the public wanted to know what private looked like. The financial architecture of the decision was pragmatic. Balmoral costs approximately £3 million per year to maintain. 50 full-time staff on grounds that stretch across 53,000 acres of highland terrain, requiring constant management. A herd of 2,000 to 2,500 red deer that must be culled annually. 150 buildings that need roofing, plumbing, heating, and repair. The forestry operations at Ballochbai bring in revenue. The holiday cottages on the estate generate rental income, but these sources have never fully covered the cost of keeping the castle alive. Tourism changed the equation. The tickets, the new restaurant, the modernized gift shop selling the Balmoral hunting tartan on everything from scarves to tea towels. Suddenly, the estate was not just a residence. It was a destination, and every visitor who walked through the door was both a customer and a witness. This is the tension at the heart of Charles's transformation. Every room a visitor sees is a room that can no longer hide anything. The drawing room that once hosted private conversations between the sovereign and the prime minister is now photographed by tourists and posted on social media. The ballroom where the Balmoral test was administered across candlelit evenings and whiskey-fueled reels is now a space that strangers can assess for themselves. The granite walls are still 3 feet thick, but they might as well be glass. Was this Charles's intention? To dismantle the machine his great-great-great-grandmother built? Or is it simpler than that? A practical king with a leaking roof and a tax bill, opening the doors because the alternative is watching the building crumble? The answer is probably both. Yeah, and neither answer changes the result. Balmoral, for the first time in its existence, is being seen. And what is seen can never be fully hidden again. Chapter 11. The statue in the corner of the garden. More than a century after Edward VII tried to erase John Brown from history, his statue still stands exactly where the furious king banished it. Walk the grounds of Balmoral today and you will find it, the bone bronze, tucked behind hedges in a remote corner of the estate. John Brown cast in metal, life-sized, standing forever at a slight angle as though waiting for a queen who will never come. The inscription reads, "Friend more than servant." Edward wanted it destroyed. He settled for exile, and the exile endured through 2 world wars, through 5 monarchs, through the complete transformation of the society that created it. The statue simply stood there, patient and immovable, a physical reminder that some things resist erasure. It is not the only survivor. The cairns Victoria ordered built on the hillsides still stand, weathered by 160 winters, lichen-covered, some tilting slightly as the ground beneath them shifts, but still there, still marking the places where a grieving queen walked with the 2 men she loved, one dead and one alive, across a landscape that neither time nor scandal has managed to change. The journals survive, too, not the originals. Those are ash. But Beatrice's transcriptions sit in the royal archives at Windsor, written in her careful hand, comprising roughly 1/3 of her mother's words. Scholars read them. They note the gaps. They chart the silences. They know that what is missing is probably more important than what remains. But the transcriptions themselves are a kind of monument, evidence that Victoria lived, wrote, thought, and felt, filtered through a daughter's love and fear, but present nonetheless. At Balmoral itself, the rhythms persist. The ballroom still hosts the Ghillie's Ball each autumn. Staff and family dance together, a tradition that dates to Victoria's time and has never been interrupted. The drawing room carpets were restored to Victoria's original hunting Stuart pattern, a deliberate act of preservation by a household that understands the power of continuity. The red deer still graze the hills, 2,000 to 2,500 head. Their population managed as carefully today as it was when Albert first ordered the counts, and in Ballochbuie Forest, on the western edge of the estate, the ancient Caledonian pines still grow. These trees were old when Victoria was young. Some date back 300 years or more. They survived because Victoria bought the forest specifically to prevent them from being felled for timber. She saved them, and they outlasted her, and they will outlast everyone reading this. This is what endures when the secrets are stripped away, not the scandals, not the whispered rumors or the destroyed diaries or the hidden photographs beneath the funeral flowers. What endures is the stone, the landscape, the stubborn traces of lives lived with such intensity that no amount of editing, burning, smashing, or banishing could erase them completely. Edward tried to destroy every trace of John Brown. The statue remains. Beatrice tried to silence Victoria's most dangerous words. The gaps in the transcription speak louder than the words she kept. Diana said the castle broke her. The castle still stands. And in a strange way, so does Diana. Her words echo through every room a tourist now enters. The house that tried to silence her has become the house that proves she was telling the truth. Certain things simply refuse to disappear. And Balmoral, for all its power, has never been able to control what survives. Chapter 12. The Cage and the Cathedral. The same granite walls that Diana called a prison are the walls that Elizabeth chose to die within. On the 8th of September, 2022, Queen Elizabeth II died at Balmoral Castle. She was 96 years old. She had reigned for 70 years. And she died in the place she loved best, in a castle 500 miles from London, surrounded by the hills and the silence and the granite that had sheltered her family for 170 years. She was the first monarch to die at Balmoral. The last monarch to die in Scotland had been James V in 1542, nearly 5 centuries earlier. Elizabeth knew this. She worried about it. Her daughter, Princess Anne, later revealed that the Queen had expressed concern about dying in Scotland, about the logistics, about the complications her death would cause so far from the capital. Anne's response was simple and startling. Just do what you want to do. It is fine. And so she did. She stayed. She died in the place that had been her refuge for 7 decades. Not at Windsor, where the archives of her ancestors gathered dust. Not at Buckingham Palace, where the flagpole still carried the memory of 1997. At Balmoral, in the Highland air, with the cairngorms outside her window and the River Dee running cold and clear below. The coffin journey took her south. 175 miles from Balmoral to Edinburgh, along roads lined with people who had come to say goodbye. Farmers formed a guard of honor with their tractors, lining the roadside in their machines as the hearse passed. It was an image that Albert could never have anticipated and Victoria would never have understood. The countryside itself paying tribute. The land honoring the woman who had loved it. And in that slow procession, something became visible that the castle had spent 170 years concealing. Balmoral was not one thing. It had never been one thing. It was not simply a refuge or a prison or a machine or a shrine. It was all of these simultaneously, depending entirely on the person standing inside it. Charles felt empty without Balmoral. The mountains restored him. The routine grounded him. The silence filled something that noise could not reach. He walks the estate today as its owner, its custodian, and its most devoted inhabitant, a man who opens the doors to tourists because he believes the castle will survive being seen. Diana felt emptied by Balmoral. The schedule devoured her. The walls closed in. The rituals that others experienced as comforting she experienced as coercive. She left with scars. She spoke about them. And in speaking, she changed the way the world understood what happened behind those 3-foot walls. Victoria built her grief into the hills. She turned the landscape into a memorial and the castle into a reliquary. She hid her greatest love inside the building's silence and carried the secret to her grave, literally, with a ring on her finger and a photograph pressed against her heart. Elizabeth chose it as the place to leave the world. After 70 years of public service, after a reign that spanned the collapse of empire and the rise of mass media and the transformation of everything Balmoral was designed to conceal, She chose the 53,000 acres of silence as the last thing she would ever know. The same unchanging stone, the same rigid rituals, the same hills and forests and rivers that have not moved since the glacier carved them, experienced as shelter by those who belonged, and as a cage by those who did not. This is the final truth about Balmoral. It is neither paradise nor prison. It is a mirror. The castle shows you what you bring to it. It reflects your love back as peace and your fear back as suffocation. It amplifies whatever is already inside you. It does not create joy or misery. It magnifies them, and it will outlast every person in this story. The granite does not care whether you loved it or whether it broke you. It does not remember Victoria's ring or Diana's tears or Elizabeth's last breath. It does not know that tourists now walk its corridors with their phones in their hands, photographing rooms that were once sealed tighter than any vault. The castle simply endures, as it was built to endure, as granite does, unchanged by the centuries, untroubled by the people who pass through, standing in the Highland light on a hillside above the River Dee, in the same today as it was when Albert laid the foundation stone and sealed his message to the future in a bottle beneath the floor. The message is still there. The bottle has never been opened. And the castle keeps it as it keeps everything, in silence and in stone.